I hate game jams. That's why I joined a 7-day game jam to build a game for the Nokia 3310. 2 colors, an extremely tiny screen resolution, and can only include sounds from an actual Nokia phone. I knew this would be one of the most fun and difficult jams I would ever take part in. With 10 days on the clock, it was time to start jamming. I immediately knew I wanted to create my game in portrait mode instead of the standard landscape. Usually shoot-'em-ups and mindless mobile games use this orientation, but this would technically be a mobile game since it is on a Nokia. My major source of inspiration was the game Downwell, one of my favorite mobile games of all time, so I took a break from the jam and played a few runs. Using only 2 colors and 3 buttons, Downwell's addicting gameplay loop and tight controls are a testament to the phrase, simple is better. What makes Downwell so fun? What are the most satisfying parts of it? I decided to make my own spin on the floaty mechanic that occurs when you shoot your weapon. Essentially, gravity stops affecting the player until they stop shooting. This creates a hyper recoil effect that fits well within Downwell's narrative. The core mechanic of Floaty Boy is that the player has to complete levels by dodging spikes and traps using only their trusty balloon. By holding spacebar, the balloon slightly deflates, causing the player to stop falling briefly and float. If they hold spacebar too long, then the balloon will pop, inevitably dropping the player to their impending doom. This idea is simple, has a risk versus reward factor, and would scale pretty well during level design. First, we need a player sprite, so I dragged in All Reliable. For the player movement, all I really need is horizontal movement, so I added the most basic movement code in the history of Unity development. And yes, I didn't even bother to use the new Unity input system because I'm stubborn and I hate change. Now that the game is almost finished, let's move on to coding those balloons. First, we need a placeholder balloon sprite. I created a controller for the balloons called Balloon Controller and added that as a child to the player. This controller is responsible for deflating and inflating the balloon when the player holds and releases the spacebar. While the player has a balloon, their fall speed is cut in half. If the player holds spacebar to deflate the balloon, their fall speed becomes 80% less of what it is currently. Now if the player pops their balloon, then their fall speed doubles, sending them downwards with no chance to recover. Don't feel bad if this is too hard to follow because I don't understand it either. What are balloons most afraid of? Probably of being let go and drifting endlessly in space. But in Floaty Boy's case, the answer is spikes. I opened up a sprite and started fooling around trying to get an idea of the general direction for level design. I knew spikes would be a critical part of the majority of levels, so that's the tile I started with. Now that we have an antagonist, we just need a goal. I went back to trusty old A sprite and created the most non-door looking door. But hey, it kinda works. Maybe I'll even add an opening animation later. Using basic tile blocks, the spikes, and the exit door, it's time to start designing some levels, which in my opinion is the best part of making a game. I created a baseline level manager that keeps track of all level objects with the functionality to start, restart, and skip a level. With the level management complete, it's now time to crank out as many levels as I can within the remaining jam time. I started with 2 very simple levels. After playing through these levels about a dozen times, I quickly noticed how boring the movement felt. Since the overall gameplay loop is slow-paced, there needs to be some type of satisfying feedback for the player while they are playing to keep their attention. That's where coins come in to save the day. Everybody loves collectibles, right? I quickly made a AAA coin sprite and added a spin animation for some additional juice. I actually think it turned out pretty clean. I added some collision code for the coins, stuck a few in my levels, hit play, and then... Let's try that again. That's a little better. Now let's link a door opening animation, which occurs when the player collects all coins in the level. This adds an additional mechanic where the player must collect all the coins in order to complete the level. Perfect. Let's replace that balloon sprite. The orange is hurting my eyes. Now it's pretty much coming together. A few animations will spice things up even more. I started to think about the player death animation. Originally I looked to old Atari games like Pitfall for inspiration. For some reason I thought it would have some cool retro death animation, but instead it just looked like this. Definitely retro. I scrapped that idea and decided to make the player pop, just like a balloon would. It fits well within the overall theme and was a bit more fun. One of the biggest challenges for me for this jam was building out a readable user interface. I thought this would be easy peasy since the jam organizer provided a few Nokia fonts for the participants to use, but I dragged these into Unity and set up a Text Mesh Pro object with it, and it just looked like a blurry mess. Eventually I just snagged a raw sprite sheet of pixelated letters online and painstakingly spliced each letter into a separate letter. I'm positive there must have been an easier way to do this, but it was oddly therapeutic. While I was on this user interface kick, I made some components for the tutorial level I was planning on making. A tutorial level was absolutely needed for Floaty Boy, because the mechanics were a bit different than what players are used to. Also, nobody reads the controls section of the game description anyways. These were the options I was allowed to pick from according to the jam rules for sound effects. I ended up spending a good chunk of my time forcing my poor ears to listen to nonsensical beeps and rings until I could find some beeps and rings that sounded similar to a balloon popping. Now Floaty Boy just needs a song. I opened up Audacity and attempted to Frankenstein Nokia beeps to create a half-decent tune for my main menu. I have no idea what I'm doing. 7 hours remain until submissions close and Floaty Boy is practically finished. I'm pretty proud of all 18 levels. The difficulty scales well up until the last moment, and new mechanics are introduced throughout the playthrough. Spikes, moving spikes, and portals, to name a few. My friend Dan did an amazing job with all the art, especially the opening cutscene on the main menu. Restriction bleeds creativity. The two color palette, max pixel size, and single sound channel restrictions forced me inside a box that felt uncomfortable at first. But as I began to brainstorm, code, and playtest, the box started to expand little by little. Eventually I ended up with a box that was bulging at the seams. I learned that restrictions can be a fantastic way to overcome writer's block, coder's block, or demotivation. Having a set of guidelines and rules to follow force you to find unique ways to design around those rules, which in turn will make you a better developer and creator. Although Floaty Boy received pretty average ratings, I believe it to be a huge success. It's my favorite game I've made to date, and I can't wait to join another game jam with my newfound knowledge and experience. Oh, and major props to anyone who beats the last level. It's pretty much impossible.